Hello and welcome everyone. This is our first webinar in preparation for the pool survey that we will do next year for the SHE project. Um, Today we're going to talk a little bit about ethics, data management, and data protection. This is a webinar that also will be will be done with the people that actually is going to be doing the survey. It's not going to be a long webinar. This one? It is about, let's say, 30 minutes. And we will be talking about 5 things. One is the data life cycle, basically our planning, everything that we're doing in preparation for the pool survey. I think this is going to be interesting for you to see the whole planning process that we have been doing. We're going to talk a little bit about why do we need ethics in data and content gathering, in data collection, in data analysis. Then we will be talking about the Oxfam Responsible Data Policy. This is from 2015, and that we have been rolling out in the last 3-4 years. And I think right now most of the country offices are pretty much familiar with this policy. We will be talking about informed consent and why that is important in data collection, data analysis. And then we will be finishing with a couple of slides about the do no harm principle that we have in the SHE project. So probably we're going to be talking for 30 minutes or so. So let's start with this. This one is the first topic, is the responsible data life cycle. And let me point a couple of things to you because this is the whole process that we are going to be following, right? First, we have to make a plan for the kind of data that we are going to collect. In this case, it's a survey, but for you, in any moment, it could be a series of interviews. It could be focus group discussions. It could be also, if you remember the iStories data collection that we did. So it could be any type of data collection that you are going to do. It is basically the plan. We have to follow all these 8 steps. We should do a quick risk assessment. Basically, what can go wrong, what could happen during the interviews, during the survey. So we have to be aware of the kind of risk that the people that we will be interviewing can be exposed to when we do the surveys or the interview. Of course, the next steps is to train the people that is going to collect the data, and we have to do that responsibly as well. This is key because they are the ones that are going to be face-to-face with the person providing the information. When we collect the data, and this is a specific topic that we were going to cover today, we need the consent of the person. The person has to say, yes, I want to participate in the survey. And it is important also to have in mind that if we are interviewing younger people, like under 18, boys and girls, we need the parents' consent. So we need the consent of the person, but also we need the parents' consent. Then we have to think how we are going to manage the data, who is going to have access to it, how are we going to store and share the information. Who needs to know is the question that we have to ask ourselves. Who needs to know this information, who is going to be using it, and why. We need to do that as specific steps in our planning. How are we going to analyze the data, and how are we going to present the data? Of course, we always write a report after we do data collection, after we do an analysis. So what kind of analysis are we going to do, and how that information is going to be presented is key when we do our planning. As soon as we finish that first report, we need to have validation workshop. We usually have a meeting with the people that has been involved in the process of the survey. And then we finalize with our planning, thinking about how are we going to dispose the data, the information. After 4 or 5 years of a project, do we need that data? At the end of the project, what kind of data do we need to archive, and who is going to keep the data? And then we will think about the afterlife of the data. Quick example, I was finishing an evaluation, and I went back to see what kind of documents we had for that evaluation, and I ran into a report from 2001, and this was a couple of years ago in 2017. So 16 years later, I could find out who have said what. It was very easy for me just going through the report, find the names of the people that had been involved, contact person, even addresses, phone numbers, all that was in the final report. And it was really easy for me to find out who said what. So we have to think also what happened after the project ends, and that's what we call the data afterlife. So these are these 8 steps that we need to follow, and basically this is our plan for doing any kind of data collection. I think it will be useful for you when you plan any kind of scoping exercise, any baseline that you want to do for any other project, any focus groups or research that you want to do. I think this is very useful to have it just as a quick visual, so you don't forget anything that we need to do when we do data collection and data analysis. All right, let me go to the next slide. Something is going on here. Oh, I know what it is. Just let me change the pointer. I think that's what it is, because it's not reading my mouse. There we go. So why do we need to think about ethics and data content? And it is key for us to keep in mind that we're going into somebody's house. We are asking sometimes very personal questions and sometimes very sensitive questions. And that's why we need to think about ethics when we do data collection. It is really important because when I think about the kind of personal information that I'm collecting from people, the kind of information I need for my baseline, for my evaluation, or for a survey, that information, if it's shared improperly, if I share that with anybody, then I can put the person at risk. The person that gave me that information had trusted me, and I have to be careful how I share that information. And this is especially true for the people that Oxfam works with, because we work in vulnerable areas, we work with marginalized communities. Therefore, we need to think about that. and follow the principles, right-based principles that we have in any initiatives that we do. And that's why we need to be especially careful with personal data and the limit that other people can have with that data. It also means that we should be aware of how are we going to use and why we're collecting that data. Confidentiality becomes a really, really important element. Anytime that I'm thinking about collecting data, I always thinking about the confidentiality of that. And so just to keep that in mind, I'm always making notes about the kind of information that I need to collect and how I'm going to protect the confidentiality in any survey or any time that I'm doing data collection or data analysis. So for all the data that we collect, I always think about the minimum of data that I need. What is the question that I really have to ask and the information that I really need for the purposes that I have, right? I try not to collect data just because it might be good to have it or just because it's interesting to know, right? But we have to think about how that is going to be used in the future. And we also need to think about when the data is not necessary anymore. If the project has ended, I'm always asking myself, how I'm going to archive this information, and if the original purposes of the data gathering are not there anymore, then we don't need the data. So we can delete that, or we can just archive it in somewhere place somewhere that is safe, or has to be deleted. So these two things are very, very important for the future of the data collections that we do in terms of the quantity of data that we are going to collect. Of course, we know that if we collect too much data, we are going to have a lot of issues when we are analyzing the data because it's going to be too much to handle. And then we also might end up with a lot of files and copies of files that we don't need anymore. In 2015, and this is going to sound like a quick story. In 2015, in Oxfam, we recognized that we needed to standardize the way that we were doing data collections because we were hiring different firms, we were hiring different consultants, and each consultant had their own principles and their own ethics on it. So we came up with this policy, and we identify 5 things that are key to do data collection. And this is from the perspective of the people, right? The people that we are actually collecting the data from. One is the right to be counted and heard. That is a key element. So people have the right to give their opinions. People have the right to be counted. They also have the right to dignity and respect. That is a lot of our responsibility to act with respect when we are collecting the information. And here we're going to be repeating a lot about the informed decision, informed consent, because people have the right to know why we're collecting the data and how are we going to use it. People have the right to privacy, of course, right? We don't want to be sharing our data with everybody, so we also have to think that the same right applies to everyone. And also people have the right not to be put at risk when they are providing their personal information to be used by us or the people that we are working with. So a couple of things about the right to be counted and the right to be heard, right? There was a time when we were collecting data, doing surveys in household, and we will go to the house and ask who's the head of the household. And usually that was a man, and therefore women voices were not present in the data, were not present in the statistics. Later on, we came up with social science came up with this concept of female head households, right? That's kind of the statistic terms, how we refer to single mothers, to women that are driving a house on their own. And then we started counting them. So if we are not aware of this rate, we might go back to those times when people were invisible in statistics, their opinions were invisible and did not show up in the analysis of the data. So we need to be really careful about that. And I always have notes on the side of my surveys just to make sure that I'm complying with this right that people have to be counted and to be heard. Not only when we collect the data, but also when we do the analysis of the data. It is important that their voices are well represented. If it's in a survey, if it's in focus groups, and if it's in interviews, we have the obligation to make sure that their voices are heard and they come up in the analysis of the data. Also, I always have a note beside my surveys about the language that I'm using that is culturally and contextually appropriate. I'm making sure that the translation are well done to the local language. And this is because we usually draft questionnaires, we usually draft questions or guidelines in English, and then we translate that into local languages. So we need to be careful about how that is translated so that the meaning of the question, the sense that we want to ask for the information is maintained in different language if we use in different language in a place when we collect the data. Also, this second point here is about collecting the data that we need and not to burden people with a lot of questions, of too many questions, or too many times, going to too many times to ask for information. Okay, let me see one thing. All right. People need to know why we are collecting the information. So we need to tell people, this information is for the SHEEP project. This information is for X and X project, and is going to be for a baseline. We have to tell them why are we collecting the information. They have the right to know. And when they have enough information, then we can ask for the consent of the people to participate in the focus group, in the meeting, and they will be able to make an informed decision, and they will be able to say, yes, I want to participate, or they can say, no, I don't want to participate. And when we do surveys, even when we ask consent at the beginning of it, when we reach a point where we are going to ask very sensitive questions, it is key to ask again or to remind people that they have the right to not to respond any questions that they feel that they don't have to respond. So it is important to ask for consent again during the interview when we reach those key moments of it. We talk about that. Another element in the policy is the right to privacy. We have to look for a specific space where people feel safe about the information that they are going to give us. It is important that if it's a one-to-one interview, the space in the house or just outside the house is safe enough and people cannot hear the questions we're asking, people cannot see the interview, because that will affect the right to privacy. Only if we need a translator, then the translator can be present. If the person that is giving us the information wants somebody else to be there, we have to be careful with that because of the kind of question we're asking. So we have to assess the right to privacy when we are actually doing the data collection. And this is important for the people that we work with in terms of consultants. You can see in the slide, the second point refers to Oxfam and its agents. Its agents here refer to any company that we hire to do the data collection, any company that we hire to do training of enumerators, any consultants that we hire. They need to be aware that they have to be respectful of the privacy of the people. And consultants are not allowed to share the data they collect with others without the authorization of Oxfam. So we need to make sure that consultants understand that very well, that any data that they collect should be protected, and they should know that is part of our policy, Oxfam policy, in the way that we protect the information of everyone that takes part in an interview. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later when we talk about the do no harm, which is the right not to be put at risk. And again, this is about planning, thinking ahead, and being reasonable about the kind of measures that we need to put in place to ensure that the process of the data collection, or I will say the whole life cycle of the data, is not an element of risk to the people that have trusted us with that information. So Oxfam is the primary entity to be responsible for securing the data. So we need to follow all the steps, all the processes where data was collected, how that has been analyzed, and to the end how that is going to be stored or archived in a safe place. We're coming back to the informed consent. And it's really important for us to keep in mind that in some countries, there are laws now protecting the data of everybody. And that those laws protect the people, right? So we have to comply with those laws, but in places that those laws doesn't exist, then we are the ones to ensure that people is not under pressure to participate in any kind of survey. So when we go and ask for consent, we are going to tell them, this is for X and X project. and if you want to participate, nothing that you will say will will stop the project or the benefits of the project in itself. So they need to know as much as information as we can give them about the use of the data so that they can actually make a decision, an informed decision, and give consent. We also need to be aware that sometimes people might say yes just because they are afraid of losing a project or losing the benefits of a project, right? Oh, here is a concept that I think I need to mention clearly. The identity of the data controller. The data controller is a term, is a legal term, and that basically means that is Oxfam, uh, the, the entity that will have full control of the data of the information. Or if you are collecting data for any other project, just make sure that you refer to the name of your organization as the organization that is actually promoting the data collection, right? So that the enumerator, the person that is going to collect the data, actually give the name of the organization that is asking for the consent. The consent has to be given by a proactive measure for an action. Silence, inactivity doesn't mean consent. Or just moving the head, it doesn't mean that they are giving us consent. We need the person to have an action. We need them to sign a form. And when we do data collection using phones, then we have to make sure that they understand that we are going to click a box that says that yes, they are giving us consent. So we need to explain the reasons for the project, the reason why we are doing data collection, and then we have to ask for consent. Do you consent to participate in this survey? And then we have to tell them, I'm going to click this box, or you can click the box in the phone so that we know that people is aware that they are giving consent to participate. Here are some bullet points, quick things to keep in mind. The identity and contact details of the organization that controls the data. We have to mention that. The details about what we will do with their information. Again, this is going to be used for a baseline. This is going to be used for midterm evaluation of a project, anything that you're going to use the data for. The information about who will receive their personal data. So if it's a consultant collecting the data, this person have to say, I'm going to give this data to your organization or to Oxfam, and they will do the data analysis. They should know about the rights, including the existence of any right to access their information. If they ask about, can I have a copy of your final report? And then if we say yes, we have to make sure that we actually deliver a summary or the final report of whatever we're doing. If the people actually ask for it, they have the right to ask for any kind of reports that we will produce. And if they want to change some of the data at the end of the interview, they can do that. You will see later on in the presentation why it will be very difficult to correct the data after that, because we will not use their names and we might not know who said what. Because in the way that we will protect the privacy of the people. But this is some of the elements to have in mind when we ask for the consent. So here is why we might not know who say what. It is because when we collect the data and we have the whole database, we usually remove the names of each interview and contact, even though we ask for it during the survey. We ask for that during the survey just to make sure that we can go back if we need to, just to rectify some information that we're not sure of, or we want just to make sure that the survey was actually done. But after that, it becomes very difficult to know who say what, because we anonymize the data. Basically, we remove the names, or the names and contact details are stored in a different place where the rest of the database of the rest of the information. So people should know that we will be doing it, that we will be doing that. Okay, so one of the last few slides that I have is that it may process data about people, religions, race, beliefs, or sexual orientation. We are collecting that data, and they might want to know how we're going to use it. And we also have to be careful that people know that we're collecting all that kind of information, and that we need to be careful of how we use those categories, not to portray a specific group in a different way that we do with others. So the consent must be clearly distinguished from any other material that we are collecting the data. We're very close to the end, and here are a couple of slides about the do no harm principle. And we need to do a quick risk assessment of what can actually happen with the data of different groups, and how this data is not distorted in any way. Specifically for children, survivors of sexual assaults or gender-based violence. This is very important because in the SHE project, we ask very sensitive questions, and we need to be aware of what can happen even during the interview, and after. So when we do risk assessment, these are some groups of subgroups, if you want to call them like that, that we have to have in mind. So again, if we are working with any community, LGBTQ communities, we need to be very aware of the kind of risk that this community can be placed if we are not careful with the data that we are collecting, right? So all these groups, we need to think about them and how mismanagement of the data can create some risks. So a couple of examples. I'm not going to go through all of them, but a couple of examples are key here. We need to think about what will happen to the person that we interview when we leave the house, when we leave the community. So we went into the house, we went into the community, and we asked very sensitive questions. And when we leave, we don't know the kind of risk that this person is going to be in place. So we need to think carefully about confidentiality, be careful that the place where we do the interview is safe enough for people. so they cannot be put into risk of any reprisal from anyone, even partners or other family members that might overheard the interview that we did. So this is very key when we think about the do no harm principle. During the interview, when we are asking sensitive questions, we should be aware that um, thinking again, talking again about these experiences might bring memories, and people might feel stressed again because they will be living again those experiences. So we need to be careful there, and we need to think about the kind of support that they might need after we leave the interview. So it is important to have the contact of any office, any clinic that might provide support after the interview if that is needed. Um, okay, this is a quick intro to the ethics and data management for the pool survey that we will do. And if you have any questions, so let's talk a little bit. If you have any examples, please share. We still have some extra few minutes to ask questions and hear any comments from you. Thank you again.